Hello everybody, my name is ideologies, and today we're going to be doing Project Nuclear Downfall, a post-nuclear series where the United States and Russia enter a nuclear war that is heavily inspired by Fallout. And this entire thing will start with the Russian-Ukrainian War. So anyway, Ukraine would keep pushing into Russian territory and causing heavy losses for Russia. And they reach Volgograd, starting the Battle of Volgograd to happen. Ukraine wins the Battle of Volgograd, which causes Russia to nuke Kiev. This nuke towards Kiev severely demoralizes the Ukrainian army. This causes Russia to encircle them and Volgograd and push back into Ukraine. And they land in Crimea. The Russians launch a successful offensive into Odessa, and this cuts Ukraine off from the Black Sea. Belarus also pushes from the north, and would capture Lviv. But Ukraine launches a desperate counteroffensive to retake Lviv and knock Belarus out of the war. And this offensive goes well for the Ukrainians, and they capture Minsk, which causes Belarus to surrender to Ukraine. But Russia occupies some of Belarus. They launch a second nuke towards Lviv, and somehow Ukraine still doesn't surrender. And finally, Kiev gets encircled, which is the nail in the coffin for Ukraine, which is the final nail in the coffin for Ukraine as they surrender. And in the peace negotiations, Ukraine gets turned into a Russian puppet state, and as Belarus just gets annexed into Russia. Now on to the Middle East, with Israel and Palestine. Israel would take over the Gaza Strip and would push into the Sinai. And they would also take parts of Jordan. Oh, and they would also drop some nukes, because Israel is the only country in the Middle East with nukes. They would nuke Alexandria, Cairo, Damascus, and Baghdad. And Israel continues the offensive, even crossing into Cairo and pushing deeper into Levant. They will also push into Saudi Arabia, where they would nuke Mecca. But the Arabs have been developing a secret weapon, a nuclear bomb of their own. And with this nuclear weapon, they are going to nuke Tel Aviv. And then the Israeli Defense Force falls in on itself, as they desperately hold onto the Levant, but Lebanon will rebel, along with Jordanian rebels, and then Palestine will rebel in Gaza, and Israel has fallen. And in the peace negotiations, Palestine will be completely Israel would be completely occupied by Palestine, as they would fall. Now let's head on over to India and Pakistan, where Pakistan would declare war on India over Kashmir. And they would also push into Gujarat. The Indians would launch a counteroffensive into Gujarat and Kashmir. But the Pakistanis have repelled that counteroffensive and have pushed deeper into Kashmir. Taking over some cities in northern India. And then China would get involved and would invade Nepal and Bhutan. India would launch a last-ditch counteroffensive to attempt to defend New Delhi. And this offensive would be somewhat successful, as the Pakistanis know that they are doomed. They are going to launch some nuclear bombs. Starting in New Delhi, the nukes will land on Agra, Kolkata, Mumbai. I don't know, a lot of Indian cities. Puri, Karachi, which is occupied by them. They'll just keep dropping nukes in and Indian territories. The Indians would respond to this by launching their own nukes. In enemy territory. Dhaka gets nuked. And another place gets nuked. And thus, India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh become a wasteland. Yeah. Complete with heavy radiation. Now let's move on to the American Civil War, where the military would launch a coup against their president. And they would be led by the military. Until a new person would become the president of the United States. Russia would annex the Ukraine puppet and would invade Georgia to attempt to get their land. Armenia would declare war on Azerbaijan. Abkhazia and Ossetia would get independence as Russian puppet states. Now Russia would just invade Central Asia, starting with Kazakhstan. They would invade from the north. China would also decide to invade Mongolia. And Ulaanbaatar would get nuked, causing Mongolia to be annexed into China. Russia would nuke multiple cities across Central Asia, including but not limited to Atasu, Talas, Bukhara, Turkmenbay, Agashba, and Kyrgyzstan, causing the entirety of Central Asia to surrender into the Russia. At this point, Russia and Armenia would split Azerbaijan. Now it's time for the war to begin. World War III. With the Russian invasion into Poland and the Baltics. They would also invade from Turkey, as North Korea would invade South Korea, taking over Seoul easily, as the South Koreans would get encircled in Busan, and Busan would be taken. China would now invade Taiwan, and Russia would invade Alaska, landing in King Solomon and Jiranu. The Russians would continue to push into the Baltics, and it would make them surrender. They would also invade Japan. Korea would become the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. And Iran would also invade Turkey, launching an attack into Kurdistan. Serbia would invade Kosovo, and Macedonia, as Russia would attack Finland. The Alaska landings would continue to push until they capture Anchorage. But the United States has been working on a secret project called Power Armor. And if you've ever played Fallout, you know that Power Armor is insane in the wasteland. This results in Poland to push back the Russians. After the initial shock of the power armor wore off, the Russians would find other ways to do it, like using anti-tank rounds and artillery. The Democratic People's Republic of Korea would continue to invade Japan. As the Russians capture Fukushima, the Americans would decide to land in Vietnam, starting another Vietnam War. They would also land in Taiwan, which would be an invasion later. The invasions in Vietnam would continue to push until they get to Hanoi and Vietnam surrenders. The Russians would push to Helsinki and make Finland surrender. Sweden would launch an invasion into Finland to attempt to liberate their buddy. Moldova would push into the place. Poland would also liberate the Baltics, as the remaining Ukrainians would launch rebellions in Kiev and Crimea. These rebellions would push out into more land. Sweden would continue to push into Karelia. And the Ukrainian rebels would liberate their homeland. In South America, Venezuela would invade Colombia and Guyana. While Argentina would remain neutral. The Russians would continue to push into Alaska and even invade into Canada. By this point, Japan would push out the Russians on their islands and would even take back Sakhalin. They would also push the Koreans out of their land. At this point, South Korea would launch rebellions. And they would liberate their homeland. The Americans and Canadians decided to launch a counteroffensive against Alaska, while also building a ton of bunkers called vaults, that, unlike in the Fallout games, are actually meant to protect them, the dwellers. Anchorage has been liberated, and the United States can focus on knocking out Russia by landing in Siberia. They would also land in Kamchatka. Turkey would push the people out of their country, as Armenia would be taken over. Georgia would be liberated, as Poland would continue to push into Russian territory. It's not looking good for Russia at this moment. Now the Americans would decide to invade China mainland, along with support from everyone. But this would prove to be a meat grinder. As the Americans would overextend themselves. With these landings, creating long, horrible dugout warfare. They would also invade from Vietnam. The Koreans would push deeper into Manchuria. And would have some of the thing liberated. Now Poland would push to Moscow. And would encircle it. Bulgaria would push deeper into Serbia as Albania pushes into Kosovo. Hungary would push into Vojvodina, as Bosnia would also push against Serbia. And Serbia would be destroyed. The Koreans have encircled Beijing, like Moscow. The Axis, seeing as their campaign is almost over, would launch nukes. The first nukes would hit the United States, with nukes being launched to Syracuse, New York, Boston, Philadelphia, and Erie. They would also nuke Pittsburgh. Washington, D.C. would also get nuked. Atlanta would get nuked. Miami would get nuked. Tallahassee would get nuked. Columbia would get nuked. Greenville would get nuked. The Russians would also nuke Canada in places like Toronto, Ottawa, Montreal, and Quebec. A place in Maine would also get nuked. The Chinese would also launch their nuke in San Francisco, Los Angeles, Seattle, and Portland. They would also nuke Vancouver and Anchorage. The Americans would nuke Caracas, and that would be it. Back to America. Houston El Paso, Dallas, and Austin would get nuked. Detroit, Chicago, Cleveland, Cincinnati, and Columbus would get nuked, along with Richmond. Nashville would get nuked. New Orleans would get nuked. Columbia would get nuked. Des Moines would get nuked. Minneapolis would get nuked. Las Vegas would get nuked. Reno will get nuked. I'm sick and tired of saying this state will get nuked, so let's do this. And this is a map of all the nukes in the United States. In Europe, though, things would be extremely different, with nukes going to London, Paris, Berlin, Dublin, Brussels, Amsterdam, Bern, Vienna, Prague, Munich, Cologne, Würzburg, Bremen and Hamburg, Madrid, Lisbon, Barcelona, Rome, Genoa, Turin, Milan, Venice, Naples, Warsaw, Vilnius, Kaunas, Riga, Tallinn, Helsinki, Vasa, Stockholm, Kalmar, Oslo, Copenhagen, Sarajevo, Zagreb, Sofia, Athens, Istanbul, Ankara, Baku, Kiev, Sevastopol, Bucharest, Budapest, Belgrade, Chisinau, Lviv, Minsk, and that's about it. In Asia, Seoul will get nuked. Tokyo will get nuked. Nagasaki will get nuked again. Hiroshima will also get nuked. Fukushima will get nuked. Sapporo will get nuked. Kochi will get nuked. Bangkok will get nuked. Hanoi will get nuked. Banda Aceh will get nuked. Jakarta will get nuked. Australia will not fare much different either, with Brisbane, Sydney, Wagga Wagga, and Canberra will getting nuked. New Zealand will also not fare that well, as Wellington will get nuked. More nukes will be launched in the United Kingdom, including Plymouth, Edinburgh, Glasgow, Newcastle, Belfast, Ipswich, Portsmouth, Kingston upon Hill, Caernarfon, Manchester, Liverpool, Preston, Derby, and that's about it. Look at the nukes. Now the first American nukes will hit Russia in Moscow, St. Petersburg, Volgograd, Murmansk, Archangelsk, Astrakhan, Omsk, Kryzil, Tyumen, Irkutsk, Vladivostok, Yaktutsk. They will nuke Beijing, Nanjing, Shanghai, Wuhan, Hong Kong and Macau, Chuzion, Urumqi, Bajong, Anyang, Baofao, Hulunbur, what? Pyongyang will get nuked. South America wouldn't fare much better, with Brasilia, Rio de Janeiro, Sao Paulo, Recife getting nuked. Lima will also get nuked. Santiago will get nuked. Buenos Aires will get nuked. Montevideo will get nuked. Asuncion will get nuked. Bogota will get nuked. Mexico City will get nuked. San Jose will get nuked. Panama City will get nuked. And that's about it for the nuking insanity. Humanity is all but almost extinct. And those people who are emerging from their bunkers will end up in a new era of history as the world becomes a nuclear wasteland. Alright guys, that's the end of this video. Please like, subscribe, and hit the bell for notifications. I'll see you in the next one where we watch Civilization Rebuild. EddieICJ 2009 out.